So, first question. Let's get the obvious question out of the way first. Why has it taken so long to introduce what is arguably the most important navy in history into World of Warships?
Well, the answer to that is fairly simple because of the initial scope of the game and it being released by our St. Pete studio. Access to blueprints as well as the cost connected to obtaining blueprints. The navies that we introduced first were the ones that were most at hand and easiest to do. Of course, there was an emphasis to have the Grand American Navy at least a bit, and there was the really easy compared to British Russian Navy to get, and that's basically how we got there. Not every project starts as a gigantic one, as you know. So we started, and we had to. You have to make some choices, and the question is: do you want to release the most important navy, which is also not the easiest one to build, as the very first thing when you release the game? And the decision back in the time when I actually wasn't making the decision, I only inherited this decision, was no. They released the certain group that actually went live, and that seems to have been a relatively good choice. Even though there obviously were the questions for months, like where is the British Navy? Well, it's there now. I know that it took us a while, but we're really happy to release it now, and especially so close to Trafalgar Day and
Of course,
generally.
yes.
Oh yeah, tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow.
And, I mean, even speaking from a historical perspective, most of the major sea battles of World War II occurred in the Pacific anyway, and that was Japan, although the Royal Navy were there, but they played a minor role, and that was Japan and America. So if you put an America in, it makes sense to have the Japanese as their enemies. So, I mean, I kind of understood why you went ahead the way you did, but I know a lot of people have been asking the question.
Yeah, we actually answered this question in a few interviews because it was asked many times over the course of the last year. But it's still being repeated because it's really hard to actually place such an answer in a visible place. Like, where would you actually put it on a portal saying we don't have the British Navy because X, Y, Z? No, the answer is very simple, actually, just because of need and costs and all this balancing. And it's finally there.
Since the Royal Navy only ever built 2 or 3 classes of heavy cruisers, historically they preferred battle cruisers and light cruisers, was there ever a plan for you to include these heavy cruisers at higher tiers in the same way that other cruisers have 203mm gun-armed cruisers at tier, well, depends on the Navy, obviously it varies, but generally from tier 7 and up? Or did you see the lack of heavies in a Royal Navy cruiser line as an opportunity to go full light cruiser and see what you could do with it?
Well, it will be a completely different discussions, basically which content you want to launch. And the decision was eventually to launch this line, but we're not saying we will not launch another line of cruisers or maybe subline going from the light ones later, like the Imperial Japanese is now going to start midway in the line. And maybe that's what we're going to do with the Royal Navy. We'll see about that for sure.
Yeah, because you've set the precedent now with the Japanese destroyers, 2 separate lines of destroyers. You could always branch off and do, because I think historically the Royal Navy only ever had 3 different classes of heavy cruiser. They just didn't like them as a concept, but you could put them in, just branch them off halfway down the light cruiser line.
Yeah, one other thing is that basically, the light cruiser branch makes sense. Historically, the heavy cruisers would look weird at the top tiers because they were basically 1920s, 1930s designs.
Exactly, yeah.
So they would suffer from not really that high anti-aircraft defense. There would need to be a lot of very much fantasy upgrades, so basically there wouldn't be much point in having the ship itself there, because even if we take just the British heavy cruiser classes, there is a kind of paradox situation that the newer class is the overall worse one because it was built for tonnage constraints, so lighter than the originals and with significantly weaker armament.
Damn the Washington Treaty.
Yeah, exactly. So basically squeezing this in the middle of the light cruiser branch wouldn't really make sense, especially since the Royal Navy has a very much very diverse light cruiser designs that can fill basically at least 2 branches.
Yeah. I was just reading a book on Royal Navy light cruisers during the First World War, and it's just ridiculous the amount of different types of light cruiser that we had. Right, we know that the original Royal Navy cruiser line was put on hold for changes because you weren't happy with the way they played. Now, I kind of agree, but what specifically was it that you guys at Wargaming weren't happy about?
Well, the list of things we weren't happy about, it was pretty long at first. It wasn't just one thing. If it was one thing, we wouldn't have postponed the release. It was a set of conditions that made it, first of all, the thing which is still there, that they're really hard to play. They're for a specific audience who want a bit more of a challenge. They're very hard to excel at, but for people who've been aware of their surroundings and able to prioritize properly and put themselves in situations they want to be in, they'll be really comfortable. The second thing is what it is to play against them. And one of the very big issues of the first iteration was it was really not a fun thing to be playing against them. And end of the day, you could make the most historically accurate ship in the world. And if it's not fun to play against it because of its composition and game design that was initially there, you cannot release such content. So basically, the combination of both playing being super hard and not really interesting, and the fact that you couldn't really have fun playing against them because they stood out as ships that were in the smoke setting you ablaze, it just doesn't work. It would not be a good element of the game that would be a whole on its own. So all that led to the sudden decision, and believe me, there was a lot of discussions and calls and emails exchanged about that, because it's never a light decision to postpone a piece of content, especially when it's this anticipated by our players.
Well, this kind of ties into the previous question. But in your own words, describe what it is that makes the Royal Navy cruisers different. What's unique about them? Why would somebody want to play them rather than the cruisers of another nation?
Well, of course, they're the Royal Navy cruisers. I need no other reason to play them just because of the flag they're waving.
Exactly. What more reason do you need, damn it?
Exactly. But on a more serious note, I like playing destroyers myself. I'm not that much of a cruiser person, but that also forces you to have a certain level of challenge and going up close and dropping the distance. These ships require the same. You cannot be far away and trying to snipe people, and I really like this kind of playstyle. And even though I'm aware that it's going to be a very big hit to my win ratio, which already isn't the most amazing, I'm going to be enjoying that most likely.
So, I mean, they are unique though, aren't they? No high explosive shells, but they get good normalization on their armor piercing from tier 3 and up. They all get the ability to repair their health, which they do need because they are very fragile ships.
Yeah, they're very squishy.
There is this combination of having smoke, having the ability to extend spotting through smoke and seeing the incoming torpedoes, so allows you to not only smoke but actually stay in it and proactively provide support to your team while avoiding your own death, thanks to good rudder shift times and turning radiuses. Mm-hmm. So thanks to the agility and the ability to be the information center in front of your other ships, it makes it an interesting gameplay because you become a very important part of the team, which is, thanks to the recent update of the economics, actually a very decent thing for you in regards to rewards at the end of the battle.
Spotting damage, things like that.
Yes, without that change, you can imagine how difficult it would be to turn a profit playing a British cruiser now.
And they are incredibly agile ships. I was playing the Minotaur the other day. That thing actually accelerates in a full hard rudder turn. It doesn't drop below 32.8 knots when going at full speed in a full turn, and it actually accelerates while turning. The agility of these ships is just ridiculous. Well,
yeah, I would say that the specifics of the Royal Navy cruisers are very close to their historical counterparts, because basically, the Royal Navy cruisers were always kind of prone to take damage thanks to their relatively light armor. But on the other hand, their crews often did a lot to keep them afloat, which is represented by the repair ability. And 2 elder guns are specific. The historical Royal Navy was big on using semi-armor piercing, which was kind of specific among the navies, because most navies switched at around 6 inches to normal armor piercing. The Royal Navy kept to their peculiarities. So yeah, the special AP also fits, and the relatively nice torpedoes are very good help when you need to deal with battleships, because other than that, it would take a long time.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Anyway, next question. And again, down to the ammunition choice. No high explosive shells on the Royal Navy's guns. Although I did find it quite amusing that the Black Swan's armor-piercing ammunition is listed as high explosive practice ammunition, which is... But yes, anyway, no high explosive shells on Royal Navy 152mm, well, on any of their guns. So battleship players might be heaving a sigh of relief, but British cruisers are still able to deal with battleships. Can you go into specifics about what it is that makes the British armour piercing effective against armour?
I'm not sure if you'd expect me to explain the mechanic of how penetration works. The purpose of anti-piercing is to get through the armor and finally damage what's inside, and that's exactly what they'll be doing. Thanks to the penetration value, they'll be going inside, and that combined with the ability to get really close and get good arcs of those shots rather than shooting from far away and having the shots come at a rather uneasy angle should make a great part of the shots that they're shooting actually go into the ship, and even though you can't rely on fire damage, dealing damage over time due to lack of explosive shells, you should be delivering the proper amount of damage. But yet, battleships should not be most of the time your target of choice in British cruisers. Of course, sometimes you have to, but they're not the target audience here.
I was under the impression, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here, the British armour piercing got higher normalisation than other nations' armour piercing. Is that true, or have I been
Yeah, it is true. It has a higher normalization. It has also kind of dual setting for the explosion, because as the game simulates it, after penetrating the target, the shell flies for some time before exploding, just like normal AP. So if you are shooting at light targets, lightly armored targets, such as destroyers, the explosion is almost instantaneous, so it works very much like HE, which means that you will get less over-penetrations and will be dealing more damage to the lightly armored targets, which is quite good because it allows you to shoot destroyers in the face and survive.
Yeah.
And when hitting a heavily armored target, the delay is like a standard AP, so you can score citadels and it doesn't explode prematurely. So basically, when dealing with lightly armored targets, it's easy. You just shoot them full of holes and they eventually sink. When dealing with heavily armored targets, if you are not sure that you will penetrate their armor, it's best to aim for the superstructure or for the bow and aft ends, and basically for the lightly armored structures. And with a very nice feature against especially heavy cruisers, if you keep your range from the heavier armored targets, you can get some nice plunging fire that will fall from the top, so you won't have to be concerned that much about angling. But obviously it needs good aim because the gun ballistics aren't the best. So yeah, basically if you are fighting anything that is lighter than you, you can afford going close and shoot it in the face. If you are fighting anything that is heavier than you, you should try a bit sneakier tactics, using terrain for cover, using the smoke, and wearing them down until they are basically issue of one torpedo salvo. Then you can come closer and launch the fishes.
Consumable choices. Hydroacoustic search, smoke, or radar. You can't have them both. And more interestingly, no defensive fire cooldown on any of the Royal Navy cruisers. Comments?
I'm not sure what kind of comment you'd like to hear here, but generally, we kind of answered this before, saying like what's the play style that could be very beneficial for the team. So you have the smoke, you have the radar. There was actually somebody's video of I think the Belfast that I saw, a great use of smoke and radar to spot the destroyers around him to basically really rain pain on everything around. That's kind of the core idea. And the defensive AA fire, if they did have that consumable, that would bring them closer to the typical cruiser we already have in game. It would take away, by adding a consumable like this, you just take away part of the uniqueness of it. You can, of course, give the same consumables to every ship, but by having to choose a different set, you already add a certain degree of customization and character to a group of ships.
Yeah. Besides, the British cruisers are not really that hard pressed against planes, at least we hope not, because of their excellent maneuverability, so they can, well, they will have to play a bit more the passive defense angle against aircraft, so dodging torpedoes, dodging even incoming dive bombers. And the last two tiers have very good anti-aircraft suit that is very strong even without the defensive fire, especially the Minotaur, which is a monster.
Right, so next question. In the previous iteration of the Royal Navy light cruisers, it seemed that up until around about tier 5 or 6, they had not enough armour to protect against battleship gunfire, but just enough armour to arm the fuses of battleship armour piercing, so they took full damage from every battleship shell that hit them. At tiers 6 and up, it was even worse. They had just enough armour to arm the fuses of 15 and 16-inch shells and could be expected to take full damage from battleship hits, but they now also had too little armour to protect against heavy cruiser 203mm, and yet just enough to arm the fuses of 203mm armour piercing, ensuring that every cruiser that hit them did full damage too. Obviously these are light cruisers, so you can't just add armour where it didn't exist. So what steps, if any, have you taken to give the Royal Navy light cruisers survivability?
So we kind of answered this question in the previous questions, and it worked mostly on your active skills and your ability to both predict where the enemy is and who will be targeting you, and ability to hide, as well as your ability to dodge. So the use of smoke as well to conceal you when you see that you got into a situation where you really shouldn't be. And the combination of that should deliver your own survivability. So it's skill-based rather than the passive thick armor survivability that you'd usually see in many ships, especially battleships rely greatly on passive survivability, where your ship itself is your protection, but the ability to dodge with your gigantic steel beast is relatively limited. All you can do is try to predict where torpedoes will be coming from and try to, before that actually happens, try to dodge what will be happening. While with the British cruisers, you'll be able to reactively see what's happening right now, and once you detect torpedoes, dodge them. Once you see enemy ships, either turn around and run or approach them at the appropriate angle to not show your entire broadside and quickly hide it if you were in that kind of situation.
And if worst happens and you get hit, which means that you will take damage, because as you said, the armor wouldn't really save you from anything bigger than you, then you have to just rely on the seamanship of your crew and use the repair function.
Yes, obviously because they get the repair function from tier 3.
Yep.
So, to summarise, Royal Navy light cruisers: fast, highly manoeuvrable, stealthy, lightly armoured. Difficult to hit citadels? Is that a fair assessment? The citadels do all seem to be quite low in the water.
I wouldn't say so.
I
no.
wouldn't say so. I mean, that's again, even with the citadels, we are kind of limited historically, because the citadels are obviously containing the vital organs of the ship, so mostly engine rooms, boiler rooms. Mm-hmm. And even when Britain was working on the post-war light cruiser designs, namely design ZA, which is in our game as a Minotaur, they were comparing them to the Worcester-class American light cruiser, and they noticed that basically the American engine plant and especially the boiler rooms are much lower than in the British design, right. Basically one full deck lower. So unfortunately, all the British ships share the basically rather tall citadel, so that means that you will get hit into it. On the other hand, that's also one of the perks of the repair ability, because on the high tiers, tier 8, 9, 10, the repair ability not only repairs very fast, but it also repairs citadel damage. So
I see.
It
Okay.
should help in surviving any enemy attention. If, as I said, you have to play using a terrain a lot, so basically always keep some island handy where you can retreat and repair and not get hit.
Well, to continue, reasonable anti-aircraft, but with no anti-aircraft burst fire capability. Torpedoes, this is something we haven't mentioned yet, that can be fired either one at a time or in spreads, and lots of 152mm guns with no high explosive but superb armor-piercing performance. Does that about sum it up?
I think yes, it's
Yeah.
more or less an accurate statement of what the British cruisers are right now. Plus, they're awesome. You forgot that.
Plus, they've got a really, really good flag.
Of course.
Right. And it's definitely, well, it seems to be a case of skilled captains only need apply.
Definitely.
Well, for the higher tiers, yes. The lower tiers are forgivable by default. So up to tier 4 or 5, anybody should try them and see how it goes. But about tier 5, you'll start feeling the all these characteristics that you mentioned, and it should kick in that if you're not a skilled player, if you have not played at least 100 battles or so, you may want to consider switching for either different nation and class, or just maybe trying cruisers of a different nation. But they're definitely not for a complete newbie who just came into the game and wants to try it out, because that could provide not the most enjoyable experience.
Well, guys, thanks very much for answering my questions, and thanks for your time.
Jingles, one second. Can you just talk?
Yeah, okay. Talking. What are you doing? Oh, it's moving.
The sound is far worse now. And can you hear yourself?
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yes.
Can I mute myself?
No, can you hear yourself when you're talking now?
No, I can't, but I can hear microphones moving around.
Yeah, it's
Can
not
you-
moving.
Yeah, it's stopped moving already.
Oh, okay.
But you can hear the guys well, yeah?
I can, yes.
Okay, because the microphone was pointing the wrong way.
Technology company, yeah.
Hey, I've got nothing to do with IT.
Yeah. We are community. We are users.
I'm not community.
Yeah, he's not community. He's even.
Oh, this is gonna. I'm using this at the end of the video, totally. Right. Anyway.